Hi, today we have with us Assembly Member Rochelle Nguyen from the state of Nevada. She represents District 10. Welcome, Assembly Member Nguyen.
Hi, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about COVID-19 and how it's impacted you and Las Vegas, Nevada.
I think it has affected us much like it has affected people across the country. I think here in Nevada, we have a unique experience because our economy is based on tourism. And, you know, for the first time in a historic move, which I think was the right move, and it was a smart move, and it was a safe move, we shut down all of our casinos for a little over 2.5 months. And that is a great source of where all of our revenue comes from in the state, is our tax dollars. We don't have the state income tax. We have very low property tax, and most of our income comes from mining and gaming. And obviously shutting down gaming was significant. So we've been dealing with that as a state. I've been dealing with that in my professional capacity and also my legislative capacity.
And so I take it the casinos are back open, is that right?
They are back open. We just recently finished up the 32nd special session. It was our second special session since the pandemic started. Our first special session was predominantly budgetary. We had to cut approximately $1.4 billion from our budget because of the lack of revenue coming in from gaming. So it was pretty significant. Our second one was to help protect our casino industry as well as help protect our casino workers. As you can imagine, that was a fine balance on getting people back to work and also protecting businesses that are complying and trying to do everything they can during, you know, this global health pandemic to keep patrons safe as well as keep their employees safe. So we had legislation that we took on in an emergency capacity to allow for the safe opening of our casinos.
Okay. And of the efforts during this pandemic, what have been some that have worked, I guess, and what would you say hasn't worked?
I think it's we're in a democratic state. And so our messaging has been consistent from like state leaders and local leaders and even our executive office about the importance of social distancing, the importance of wearing a mask, the importance of taking all the precautions that you can to limit the spread of COVID-19. So I think on that level, it has helped. I think shutting down the casinos and not having that really helped during the height in April and May of this year, because we just didn't have millions of people coming in for conventions and gaming and that. But we see like an uptake right now as we're open. It is very limited and it is a very different experience for like, you know, tourists and customers coming in here, but we have much more of a domestic clientele. And I think you still see some of that. We have a very libertarian kind of like bend here in the state of Nevada. So you have a lot of people that are still reluctant and still take, you know, listen to, unfortunately, you know, the president of the United States, you know, who sometimes is downplaying the importance of things like masks and social distancing and opening up schools, but then occasionally will come out and wear a mask and have, you know, talk about the importance. So I think some of that inconsistent messaging has really hurt like our efforts here to do that. I think one of the difficult things has been waging like unemployment, because I think we have like one of the highest in the United States. Our state is one of the highest. So always room for improvement.
Yes. So, shifting gears a bit, so according to Stop AAPI Hate, there have been over 2,000 reports of hate incidents against Asian Americans in the wake of COVID-19. Have you seen any of this in Las Vegas?
We've had a lot of, nothing like that's made the news, I should say. I think there is a lot more when it comes to like, on like a local, more like microaggression type, like, you know, I know that a lot of our businesses, our restaurants, you know, there are like Asian markets and those areas have really felt the impact of, you know, just like a lot of small businesses have. But I think there's a larger concentration, at least here in Nevada and probably across the United States, of a lot of our micro small businesses that don't employ as many people have really been hurt by some of the bias and, you know, implicit hate that's out there. I know on a personal level, my family works in a nail salon in Sacramento, and they have had like actual hate crimes and like vandalism and stuff targeted because of their ethnicity and race. So
I'm sorry to hear that.
that's okay. They are strong women, so
Yeah.
they will not put up with that. So that's good to hear.
So worldwide, people have seen the death of George Floyd and the resulting protests. How has it been in Las Vegas?
You know, that is a field that I work in on a you know, professional level. I'm a criminal defense attorney. I've done a lot of indigent defense work, so I see a lot of the injustices that take place for members of our Black community here, you know, just on a daily basis. Everything from the fact that I know I've never been stopped for jaywalking, not once in my entire life. And I'm not going to lie, I probably jaywalk to get from my office to the courthouse on a daily basis, yet I've never been pulled over and patted down or searched for any of those reasons. So we have had that momentum. You know, I'm very fortunate in our state, as a part of our 32nd legislative session that just finished up last Thursday at about 1 in the morning, we were able to pass some substantial criminal justice reform as a part of an emergency special session. So in addition to making access to voting by going to all mail-in voting and allowing people to collect ballots for neighbors and friends and other communities, we also passed some substantial legislation to ban chokeholds in our state. To allow protesters to videotape police officers during that. We've had some issues here during protests where legal observers or protesters or even journalists were arrested and cited and actually taken in the middle of a pandemic and charged with like failing to disperse or disturbing the peace. So we've taken some of that and we've moved forward. It's a starting place, and I know that there's a lot of discussions going further on what we can do to address some real like change, like systemic change that's in our criminal justice institutions.
Do you have any thoughts about what those additional measures could be?
We are looking a lot about training, like implicit bias training, not only for police officers, but perhaps like judges and prosecutors and defense attorneys. I think that you have to look at it on every level to address real change. Post like certification training, those kind of things on that level. Also, we did some changes to how records are kept, whether it's like body camera or displaying badge and name ID. I know that there have been bills that have been filed in those areas. And I know that just in looking at our prison populations, we're also looking at some of the potential injustices of people serving long, if not life sentences for like non-violent drug offenses. So I think on a lot of different levels, how we can tackle the problems that are just ingrained in our judicial system. So those are some things that I know are being looked on by myself as well as other members of the legislature here in Nevada.
Has the Asian American community been involved in the Black Lives Matter movement in Las Vegas?
They have. Our Asian American Pacific Islander Democratic Caucus is very active here in Southern Nevada. We routinely still have Zoom meetings every Monday or every month, think it's the second Monday of the month. And they are very involved. Sometimes we have upwards of like 50 members on a Zoom call. So it's fantastic to have that level of involvement. They are really engaged, not only with state legislative leaders, but we routinely have our congressmen and women, you know, giving talks, talking about, you know, our own, recognizing our own like complicity in like this movement and how we can get involved and show support for people of color that are, you know, disproportionately affected by the injustice and inequity in our criminal justice system. So there has been a very like strong support. So I'm very encouraged by that.
So the current COVID-19 pandemic and Black Lives Matter movement has changed the state of the world drastically. What do you think is required of the United States and of the world going forward?
Oh, so many issues and so interrelated. You know, I think having consistent, safe messaging from our local and state and national leaders here is really important when it comes to COVID-19. You know, it's unfortunate that we have places that, you know, in my opinion, are burying their head in the sand about the impact that it has. And unfortunately, you have a situation where you have people, you know, that, you know, I heard this a lot. We closed down casinos and people were talking about how our death rates were like so much lower than predicted. And I had to point out that perhaps they were lower than predicted because we shut down. So I think sometimes it's just about educating people and having consistent messaging on that education like piece. I think it's having our local businesses recognize that it's not about them forcing people to wear masks, but they need to stand up and say, we want to open up safely and we want to protect our customers and we want to protect our employees and we want to protect our employees' families when they go home. You know, we need to put these things in place. And so I think having that kind of consistent messaging from the top down is going to be really important. Because until we have like a vaccination or a legitimate like treatment plan that is going to like help us like move forward, I think that is one of the things. I would like to see us participate more on a global scale and see what other countries are doing. We know other places have done tremendous work in curbing, you know, the spread of COVID-19. In some places, it doesn't even exist really because they put measures in place. So I think looking at, you know, places that have done it successfully, I think is important. And I think we need to continue to do that. With Black Lives Matter, I think we need to take the momentum. I know a lot of times people think that, you know, you can't make small steps, but I think looking at inequity at every level is really important. From the information that you collect at a time of a stop, why you are stopping that person, what that person looks like that you are stopping. And that's another thing that we're doing here that we passed during this special session was collecting racial profiling data to figure out what we can do, because without that data, sometimes it's easy for people to say, oh, it's not really a problem. And if you don't have like evidence-based data, some people need to see those numbers to know that, you know, it's not just me thinking that I don't get pulled over, you know, and that my Black neighbor does, but they need to see that, oh, you know, you're, you know, 100 times, 10 times, 5 times, you know, whatever it is, more likely to be pulled over if you are a person of color. So I think that is important, is to use that data, collect that data, and actually make steps on every level to make change.
And so what are the overall challenges you anticipate for the 2021 legislative session?
I know for our state, it is going to be budgetary. You know, it's not like we're just we cut our budget and that's the end of it. I think we have to have take a serious look at diversifying our economy here in the state of Nevada, or making a more fair, like more equitable collection of revenue and really look at revenue sources. I think we have always been reliant on casinos, and hopefully, and I believe that they will come back, but it is not going to be something that is quick. And in the meantime, we have schools to pay for, we have roads to repair, we have infrastructure to rebuild, we have, you know, I mean, name everything. We have mental health services and Medicare and Medicaid and health related things. So I think there's a lot of things. You know, I'm optimistic though that there are some things that the pandemic has like brought to light that I think have always been on the back burner. A lot of infrastructure things, especially on modernizing and technology, whether it's, you know, our court systems were always like almost like one step away from carbon paper. And in some places there is carbon paper that they actually give, like that duplicate paper where you write stuff. And so with COVID-19, there isn't this passing of like paperwork in the courtroom any longer. And this has been perfect because these courts have moved in and a lot of them are using federal CARES fund dollars to modernize their courtrooms, you know, embrace the technology that I think was always like on the back burner of things to do. So I think there's some momentum that we can do. And I see that in other avenues like increasing telemedicine, telepsychiatry, telecounseling, those kind of things where people are stuck in their homes and we can encourage different forms of like therapy, different forms of, you know, help for people when they are, you know, unable to go out to a physical location any longer. So.
What about for you? What are the bills or initiatives you're planning to move forward next year?
I'm working on a bill that will address and help encourage a more, I guess, sort of positive note with electric vehicles. You know, I had the opportunity to participate in some training and in Colorado, as well as some new energy economy type organizations. So I'm looking forward to that. I think that is something that's needed. And that kind of goes hand in hand with modernizing our like electric grid, community solar, like some of those other things that also we want to look at the equity piece as well as like the environmental piece, because I do think they go hand in hand again. I'm doing some criminal justice reform as well, like in the area of, I'm going to call them Karen laws. We've had like an outline, you know, where people are calling saying, oh, I'm being like, you know, attacked or threatened by an African-American man. Come here, and you find out, you know, fortunately that that person videotaped it and there was no threatening. So right now in our state, that is a simple misdemeanor citation. And so that is a dangerous situation that we're putting our law enforcement responders in. And we are also, you know, obviously, that is a problem that is a larger, like, you know, societal problem that we need to address. So I'm looking at some things in those areas. Trying to think of what else. Some third-party adoption to help same-sex couples like adopt children. So I'm kind of all over the place on where my legislation and priorities are right now.
And just for the benefit of our Japanese audience, can you explain why we call them Karen laws?
So yes, so I think every culture and every like community seems to have like a Karen. And if you look it up on like an urban dictionary or you Google it, you would be able to find it. But Karen is like a term that is used to describe like a woman here in the United States. It typically can be a white woman. It doesn't always have to be, but it is, in this case, it was a woman. What I'm referring to is there was a man who was watching birds in New York City in one of the public parks. And a woman came up and he told her that she needed to have her dog on a leash. And she did not take that suggestion well. And she proceeded to call the police and say that a Black man was threatening her life and that she was in fear for her life because he was threatening her and she was scared. Meanwhile, this was all being videotaped and he was not threatening her life. He had asked her to put her dog on a leash, which was the law. And so luckily in this situation, you know, this was all captured on videotape. But it would be a very different situation if the police responded to that and they believed that this woman was being like threatened and it had not been videotaped. There's a good chance that they would come out with, full force to protect this woman and her claims. So you get a lot of that. People that are not wearing masks a lot of times are called Karens when they're asked to leave a business and they throw a temper tantrum and ask for a manager and say they're not going to frequent a business because they have to required to wear a mask in a private business. So that's kind of what that term is describing.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing that. And thank you so much for joining us today.
No problem. Thank you for having me.